Envy's moral psychological challenge. So here's the puzzle of envy. Another person is good or has done really well in some respect, and you feel badly about it. It pains you, and maybe it even makes you want to do destructive things. Why is that? So here are a few anecdotes, some working examples of envy to guide our initial thinking here. So there's a common phenomenon of key lining expensive cars. There's a bunch of cars out in a parking lot. There's some really nice ones. And someone walks along, sees the expensive car, takes out his key, his own key, holds it between his fingers, and then walks along the side of the nice car, scratching with his key the paint, putting a nice long scratch along the side of it. And for some reason, that makes him feel good inside to minorly damage this really nice car. And of course, part of it is knowing that the person who owns the car is going to come back and then see the damage that's been done, is just going to feel some badness as a result of that. Another example, this is from some years ago, I believe it was at a university in one of the Carolinas. There were two girls who were roommates, young women, and apparently one girl was quite pretty, very popular, went on lots of dates with boys. The other girl was rather plain and unfortunately not very popular, and her dating life was not successful. And as the story was told in the papers, one night in the middle of the night, the pretty girl woke up from sleeping to find the plain girl sitting on top of her with a knife in her hand quite close to her face. It wasn't clear from the report if the plain girl planned to go ahead with it or just wanted to do it, but apparently what was on her mind was scratching or defacing or in some way doing damage to the other girl's pretty face. Another example, a working example, a movie plot. There have been a number of variations on this one done, but this one involved a younger brother who's now, I think, late 20s, and he was coming home from the big city for a family reunion. And much of the movie revolved around the tension between him and his older brother. His older brother had been kind of a star athlete in high school and had some big dreams and the potential to go off and make it big. But for various reasons, he'd just not fallen through on his ambitions. And he'd stayed in their small town, was working in a hardware store, not very happy with his career. And his younger brother's success in life, he reacted badly to it in various passive-aggressive ways, but then outright violent ways as well. So the younger brother, by contrast, had taken the risk. He'd gone off to the big city. He'd been successful, and the whole movie was then about the conflict, primarily the older brother's conflict in response to his younger brother's success. I'm reminded of an anecdote or actually a direct quotation right from American writer Gore Vidal, who confessed in a kind of a secret diary type moment, quote, "Every time a friend succeeds, I die a little." Now, note from these examples that envy can be about money, and often when we talk about envy issues, it's in a monetary financial context, but it really has a broad range. It can be about material possessions, it can be about beauty, it can be about one's dating life, it can be about one's career, or even one's self-assessment of one's life as a whole. Now, I want to put envy partly in a philosophical context, while it's a psychological issue, but I'm going to approach it first from a philosophical perspective as well, because part of philosophy, including social and political philosophy, involves cognitively identifying in abstract form principles of good and bad. What are the important values in life? What kind of character traits should one strive to embody in one's own self? What vices one should fight against or avoid? And while philosophy, of course, is abstract and rational, trying to come up with these principles, part of the project is to realize that those do need to be operationalized in one's fuller psyche and, of course, in action. Our reason is not just an abstract conceptual enterprise. It is meant to guide action. So how do we translate these abstract principles into action, in some cases into habitual action? Our reason needs to work with our passions, with our emotions. How do we integrate our reason with our emotion? And of course, our emotions are also to be integrated with our actions. So we have reason and action, reason and emotion, emotion and action. We need to have the fully embodied, operationalized understanding. And when we're doing our philosophy and trying to identify, appropriate abstract principles, we already have operationalized all kinds of other thinking habits, other emotional habits, other action habits. So we have certain patterns of emotion, thought, and action, and those ones can make it easier or difficult for us to abstract good abstract principles while we're thinking about it. And even once we get through that and we successfully identify some good principles, we still then have to modify our emotions, modify our actions in order to operationalize them in our life. Now, this is a big project, and for most of us, of course, it's an ongoing life project. And all of that is of moral, psychological interest, but there are broader social and political connections here that need to be made as well. And one of the very interesting things about the history of philosophy is how many major thinkers have grappled with the phenomenon of envy. Some of them condemning it outright, some of them arguing that it needs to be accommodated in various ways. We're familiar classically with the notion that envy is one of the deadly sins. But if we turn to the modern era, there are giant thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Ayn Rand, who wrote brilliantly condemning envy, but tying that to very perceptive analyses. Nietzsche most famously in his Beyond Good and Evil and Genealogy of Morals, Rand's very perceptive essay called The Age of Envy. On the other side of the divide in the modern world, Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that envy was a social force that was very often justifiable, and much of his social philosophy, egalitarian, quasi-socialistic philosophy, was aimed at eliminating the possibilities, right, of envy in a proper society. More recently, John Rawls, in his famous work, Theory of Justice, argues that envy is a negative emotion. It's not necessarily a proper moral emotion, but nonetheless can sometimes, if not be seen as justifiable, at least as understandable. And then you can see Rawls go on to tweak his principles of justice in a way that's going to ameliorate or lessen the likelihood that envy is going to arise as a social force. And then in any number of other thinkers, we debate philosophy, social philosophy, political philosophy, not simply in terms of abstract principles, but in many cases we see people arguing that socialism, for example, is based on envy, or that socialism is based on guilt. And notice in both cases it's an emotion that is held to be at the root of an advocacy of a political system. And of course, socialists and other anti-capitalists will return the favor, arguing that capitalism or advocacy of free markets is simply based on greed, another kind of unsavory emotion in their estimation. Now, in this episode, though, we're just going to focus on one negative emotion, one that is fairly widespread in my estimate, and that is envy. So what is this thing called envy? Can we identify it more precisely? Because if we're going to figure out what we're going to do with it and what's possible to do with it, we need to have a fairly fuller understanding of what it is. So my claim is going to be, after we do the analytical work, that envy is in fact a socially destructive emotion. But I think importantly that envy is first and foremost actually a self-destructive emotion. And that's the best and most important thing to understand it. First, it's a matter of self-sabotage or self-failure, and the more social manifestations of emotion that are of this emotion that are important are derivative of that.
Join Professor Stephen Hicks on his Adventures in Postmodernism tour next March in Australia, where he'll be giving you his insights and lessons on the subject firsthand. Find out what makes postmodernism attractive. Why is it so dangerous? How has it evolved or mutated over the years? Does postmodernism have strong connections to neo-Marxism? What is the role of it in cultural wars, campus battles over free speech, political correctness, intellectual diversity, identity politics, and the rise of Antifa and alternative right? What other political movements are now adopting postmodernism strategies, and how do we resolve these issues of postmodernism? Stephen Hicks will be appearing in 4 major Australian cities throughout March 2019. He'll be doing an evening talk in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide and Brisbane starting at 7 p.m, and will be holding an all-day special event masterclass series starting at 9 a.m. on March 10th in Melbourne and March 16th in Sydney, where he will delve even deeper into understanding postmodernism, its history, and teach you valuable strategies to actually combat it. For full details and to reserve your tickets today, go to truearrowevents.com. Select the event to which you would like to attend, and if you hurry, you may even be lucky enough to get your tickets at early bird prices at a 50% discount. And while you're in line, please leave us a review for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Now back to the podcast.
All right, let's do some more precise analytic work on this concept, because there's some rich psychological territory. So I want to classify and define envy more precisely. So let's start with some working examples. And maybe you're not a particularly envious person, but let yourself go and imagine this scenario and how it might lead you to feel some envy. So here's a situation. Imagine yourself, you're unemployed. You've lost your job. You're depressed about that some. Not only that, you're in debt. And as it happens, you're living in a crummy apartment. And financially, just, your prospects don't seem to be good at all. But for a family get-together, you're all supposed to go over to your brother-in-law's house. And when you show up at your brother-in-law's house, it turns out he's just bought this big, beautiful house. And out front, he's got this, fancy new sports car. Right? How do you feel when you see your brother-in-law's big, beautiful house and his sports car? All right, another example, this one from a movie I saw recently. Imagine you are a young woman and you just broke up with your boyfriend, and you're feeling badly about it. You feel awful, and you're sort of feeling like you're a failure, not only just in that relationship, but maybe about relationships in general. But then you are going to go to lunch with one of your longtime woman friends, and she shows up with her new boyfriend, and clearly everything's just going awesomely with them. She's happy, he's happy. They're just totally infatuated with each other. And how does that make you feel in that situation? Of course, you want to feel good for your friend, but you feel envy. Right? There's a personal example. I had a friend some years ago, and we were both kind of early middle age. And he had been an actor, really good actor in my estimation. He'd gone off to Los Angeles, Hollywood. He was going to make it, gave it the college try, but for various reasons, it really just didn't work out. And so he'd come back home and was working at some other job, not in the acting field. And as it turns out, one night we're watching television as the Academy Awards come on, and we're watching it. I'll say a few drinks were involved at this point. And partway through the show, I don't think it was for Best Supporting Actor, but it was some pretty important Academy Award. And some guy about our age gets up on the stage. He's just won the award, and my friend sitting on a chair nearby me just comes out with, "I hate that guy." Right? And actually, that wasn't quite the right tone of voice. So I said it was more, "I hate that guy," something like that. And he's stewing for a minute or two later, and then he got up from his chair, walked over to the TV, and said, "Excuse my language, fuck the Academy Awards," turned the TV off, and basically the rest of the night was, well, as you can imagine, not a fun night. So what do all of those examples have in common? I'm using them as examples of envy, one focusing on financial issues, one focusing on romance issues, one focusing on career goal issues. And here's my initial working definition, right, of envy. Envy is an emotion, right, but it's a negative emotion in response to another person's success that highlights your own failure. Okay? So it's a negative emotion in response to another person's success that highlights one's own failure. And that's a working definition. I want to unpack that further and tease out the implications of some of the components. But I think what also would be helpful here is to, since there really is a rich moral psychological territory here, is contrast envy with some closely related emotions. Sometimes making contrast between closely related things helps highlight the significance of each. So I want to contrast envy with jealousy and Schadenfreude. And all three of them are negative emotions, and they share some similarities and differences, but I think it's important to clarify the territory here. So let's take up jealousy. Jealousy often is confused. You see in ordinary parlance and discussions, people will use them as more or less synonymous, even though they are quite distinct. Now, what they do have in common is that both of them are negative emotions, and they're emotions about possessions or about possessiveness, but they are distinct. So jealousy is a fear of losing something that you think of as your possession. Envy is the painful awareness that you lack the possession, or you lack something that you want to possess. So something that distinguishes them in the fact that they are both possessiveness emotions is envy is you don't have it and you want it, but you're aware that you don't have it, and that hurts you. Jealousy is about something that you think you have, but you fear you might be losing it, and that is a painful realization. So here's an example. Now, suppose I have a girlfriend. I love my girlfriend, and here's the possession part. I think that she's my girlfriend, so I'm somewhat possessive, right, about her. So I am out and about, and unexpectedly, I don't know, I'm at the mall or somewhere, and I see my girlfriend, and she's embracing and kissing, clearly, romantically, another man. Now, what's the emotion that surges through me? Well, it's jealousy, right? But the components here are, I think of her as mine, right? She is my girlfriend. But the evidence shows that I am losing her, or I might very well be losing her to this unexpected rival man. And that's painful. So it's the pain of loss of something that I think of as mine. Another example from religious history. This is God or Yahweh in the book of Exodus, I think it is. And the quote goes something like, he says, "Thou shalt have no gods before me, for I am a jealous God." All right, and notice he doesn't say, I am an envious God. I am a jealous God. And he is, in fact, using English correctly. It's originally Hebrew, I believe, but that's just a little language joke. All right, so the components here are, and why jealousy is the right concept, is he thinks of the Hebrews as his people. They are his possession. But in the context of thinking that he might lose them to rival gods, to other gods, that is a negative from his perspective. That would make him jealous. He's not envious of the other gods because he doesn't think the other gods have those people. They're his people, but he is making it clear he would feel jealousy if he thought his possession of them is threatened. Now, envy is the opposite of jealousy, or it's an opposite of jealousy. Envy is about something that you do not have, that you don't think of as having, but that you want to possess. So if you go back to the romance, we can contrast envy and jealousy directly. Now, suppose you have a girlfriend, but you think you are losing her to a rival. Then you will feel jealousy. But suppose you don't have a girlfriend, but your friend or some rival already has a great girlfriend, then what you realize, or what you feel rather, is envy. You don't have the girlfriend, you want it. The other guy's having it. That makes you feel envy. So both emotions about possession, both about fears, but one is about losing one that you think you have. The other is about not having a possession you want to have. Now, another close contrast emotion, think of it as envy's twin, and this is Schadenfreude, which is really a delicious word for a very ugly emotion. Now, Schadenfreude is a negative emotion, but it's in response to and directed against someone else's failure or someone else's loss, and somehow psychologically that ameliorates or makes you feel better about your own failure or lack. So, go back to the example. Suppose you're of your successful brother-in-law, right? You're unemployed, in debt, living in a crummy apartment. Your brother-in-law, lives in this big, beautiful house, and he's got that gorgeous sports car. But then a tornado goes through and it destroys the sports car, and inside you feel, hey, right? And of course, outside to your brother-in-law, you say, oh, it's so sad, what a tragedy, it was such a beautiful car, and so forth. But inside, you're gloating, and it makes you feel good to know that your brother-in-law's car was destroyed. Now, my claim here is that both envy and schadenfreude are primarily about the pain of realizing one's own failings, right, or one's own lack of success. But they involve a redirection, because realizing your own pain or lack of success, that's painful. And it's hard to confront and take responsibility for. And what envy and schadenfreude are both doing is redirecting that to the other, the person who is successful in some way, or someone who has suffered a loss. In the case of envy, the other person's success, it hurts you. But in the case of schadenfreude, it's the other person's loss that gladdens you.
In Stephen Hicks's book, Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault, he writes an incredibly crafted and well-argued insight into what postmodernism is, why it exists, and why it is dangerous applied in the wrong dose, in the wrong place, as it frequently is in this day and age. Postmodernism has been the most vigorous intellectual movement of the late 20th century. In his book, Hicks traces the roots of postmodernism all the way back to the Enlightenment era, where he systematically charts how the Age of Reason sowed the seeds of unreason that was to follow, making a clear connection between postmodernism to history, leftist politics, and even the ugliness of contemporary art. Hicks presents his thesis with beautiful, easy-to-understand explanations that burn with logic and common sense. So if you've ever wondered why society holds so many assumptions about the world, and you want to understand the chaos of what is happening, Hicks's work in this book provides a huge piece to this puzzle. Why do skeptical and relativistic arguments have such power in the contemporary intellectual world? Why do they have that power in the humanities but not in the sciences? Why is a significant portion of the political left the same left that traditionally promoted reason, science, equality for all, and optimism now switch to the themes of anti-reason, anti-science, double standards and cynicism? This book is by far the most helpful resource I've ever come across for understanding why the world is turning into a direction that I just can't comprehend. Pick up your copy of Stephen Hicks's book, Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault, available now on Amazon.com. While you're online, make sure to subscribe to the Open College podcast, hosted by Stephen Hicks himself, and please leave a review for it on iTunes or Stitcher. Now back to the podcast.
Now let's unpack envy one step further, because I think there's an 8-step process that's necessary for envy in the fullest sense. The first thing that has to happen is one has to have a goal that matters to you to some significant degree. So I have a goal that matters to me a lot. It can be a financial goal, a romantic goal, a career goal, whatever. Second, I will compare myself to some other person with respect to the goal that matters to me. The third thing that happens is I realize when doing that comparison is that the other person is superior to me and I am inferior in that respect. A fourth thing is that I already have to have a kind of negative self-concept about that respect, that I suspect or know that I am a failure or likely to fail in that respect. And this may be somewhat implicit or it can be more explicit. The fifth thing is that the comparison that I make, it makes vividly real my negative self-concept about whatever it is that I am valuing. Then sixth, that's painful. The realization of my failure or my lack of likelihood of success in this area, it hurts. And seventh, this is where it gets darker, I don't want to acknowledge and take responsibility for that pain or for my painful state. One thing that we know is that it's easy for people to block out pain or to want to redirect that pain, not to take cognizance of it. And that's what I don't want to do in this particular case. And then eighth and finally, what envy involves is a redirection or a deflection of that pain and the responsibility to that other person. And what I do is I don't like that person, or I resent that person, although that's maybe not the right word there, or I hate the person, or I want to see that person damaged because that person's success is an implicit indictment of me and my suspected or actual failure state. All right, now that's 8 steps abstractly put. Let's go back to a working example, because practical examples often illustrate and make things easier to comprehend. So let's go back to that example of the person who is a struggling or a failed actor watching the Academy Awards show. So put yourself in the shoes of this person. I'll try to do this in a first-person way, and it might help if you try to do that as well. So imagine, right, you're an actor, and then you're watching the Academy Awards, and you see an actor, about your same age, winning the big award. Right? So I see this guy. He wins the big award. He's on stage. He's all happy. And when I'm watching him from my home getting that award, I feel this surge of envy. Right? Well, what had to happen for that emotion to happen? Well, first thing that had to happen is I had to value being an actor and being a successful actor. I had to want to be a successful actor. Second thing is that I had to compare myself. I have to compare actor me with actor him, the guy on the TV, in terms of success in acting career. The third thing is I have to be aware that his acting has been a success. I see his award-winning success right with my own eyes. And at the same time, I am well aware that I have not won acting awards. Fourth, I have to believe or suspect at least that I'm probably not going to succeed as an actor, or I'm not going to succeed anywhere near on that particular scale. And so, fifth is my seeing him get that award while I'm awardless. It makes me very aware that I'm not a successful actor, and I'm not going to be a highly successful actor. And that's next going to hurt me, the realization of my success, having it fully in my mind. My lack of success, my failure as an actor, that hurts. But then seventh, I don't want to think of myself as a failed actor, or nobody wants to think of themselves as a failure. But in this particular case, my wanting to be an actor is important to me, and I just don't want to have to think of myself that way. So eighth, what my mind then does is it redirects that pain to a resentment or a dislike or a pain at the other person's success, as his success is reminding me brutally of my own failure. Analogically, it's a shoot the messenger reaction. I don't want that message. It's coming from him, so I don't like him. All right, now that's an 8-step stage, working it through with an actor example, but we can try it with other examples. I'm not going to do it there. What I want to do, though, is show that envy can result from that progression of self-evaluative steps, but it's not necessarily the case that another person's success is going to cause you to feel envy. And we do know that there's lots of possible cases. These are healthy people, in healthy cases where other people's success brings out admiration, it brings out respect, it brings out motivation. I want to be like that person. So all kinds of positive things can result from comparing yourself to other people, even people who are a whole lot better than you. Envy turns on a particular kind of personal psychology, and it's not a universal personal psychology, and it's not necessary. So I want to go through the 8 steps again and show why I really think all 8 of those elements are necessary for envy in the fullest sense, to see why envy does not necessarily happen in cases where some of the preconditions are there. So we'll go back to the first step. Suppose I don't value something, but I see someone else being successful at it. Right? So I do actually have to value the thing that I am seeing the success in. So for example, I can be watching the women's Olympic figure skating and watch a woman from Russia win the gold medal in Olympic figure skating, and I will feel admiration for her. I'm not going to feel envy in that case. Well, why am I not going to feel envy? Well, because I don't compare myself to her. I don't think of myself as a woman. I don't think of myself as a Russian. And while, I like skating, being a good skater or a great skater is just not that important to me. So I actually have to value the thing in question. People have very different values, so envy or not is going to be evoked by very different things. Now, suppose, though, we make the example a little closer here. Suppose it's not the Winter Olympics. Suppose I'm watching the Olympics during the summer, and I'm watching Usain Bolt in the sprints, and he wins the gold medal in a sprinting race. Now, here's a little true confession. When I was young, I was pretty fast, and I wanted to be a fast runner. And I was, in fact, for a while, the fastest kid in my neighborhood. And for a while, I entertained this fantasy that I'm going to go to the Olympics when I grow up. And so part of what's going on now, adult me watching Usain Bolt win the Olympics, is, I do, in fact, value fast running. I do think of myself as a man. It would be nice, in my wildest fantasies to go to the Olympics and win the gold medal and so forth. But I watch Usain Bolt. I compare his speed with mine. I say, well, obviously he's a lot faster than I am, but I don't feel envious when I watch Usain Bolt. And no, why don't I feel envious? Well, because even though I value the running and running fast, I don't think of him as being in my peer group. He's a lot younger than I am. I'm older. He's a professional. I'm not, and so on. So I have to not only value it, but I have to compare myself to someone I think of as being in my comparison group or my career group. All right, so let's try another example where, and this is the third step, where I can value the thing. I can be comparing myself to someone in my peer group or my comparison group, but I'm not going to feel envy. So suppose I think of a colleague at my university who's also a philosophy professor. And I'm a philosophy professor at a university, and that matters a lot to me. And this colleague is also a philosophy person, and so he's in my comparison group. He's in my peer group. And suppose he gets a promotion to full professor. Now, in that case, I don't feel envy. Well, why not? It is a value to me. It's important. He's in my peer group, but I have already been promoted to full professor. So I think of myself as successful in that important career goal. I've already accomplished the goal that matters to me, so someone else's accomplishing that goal is not something that's going to evoke emotion of envy in me. All right, let's try for the fourth step, the painfulness and the negative self-concept about my ability to succeed with respect to the value. Let's try that one out. Suppose, hypothetically, I'm a man who wants to become a millionaire. And I'm reading in some entrepreneurship magazine about a man my age who has become a millionaire. And instead of envy, though, what I feel is admiration for that guy. And I feel this energizing motivation that I'm going to try harder to make my $1 million. So why didn't I feel envy in that case? What's the difference? Well, the difference would be is if I have a positive self-concept about my ability to become a millionaire. If I still think that I am going to be able to do it eventually, right? I've got that business self-esteem about my abilities. So I think the negative self-concept has to be there if envy is going to happen, but people who have a positive self-concept about their skills or their abilities aren't going to experience the envy. All right, what about that fifth step? Right? So take the example from the recent movie about the woman who had gone into a failed relationship, or was in a failed relationship, just broken up with her boyfriend, and she's gone out with her girlfriend, and her girlfriend can't stop gushing about her new boyfriend and how amazing he is, and life is so wonderful. And suppose that girlfriend doesn't know that I'm putting myself in this young woman's perspective now. She doesn't know that I have just broken up with my boyfriend and I'm feeling badly about it. Now, in that situation, right, I am very aware of the contrast of our situations. I'm broken up. Her boyfriend relationship is going great. I'm very sad about mine. She's very happy about hers. But it's possible still for me genuinely to feel happy for her. Right? Not envious of her. And why is that? Well, if I feel that eventually I'm going to recover from this painful breakup, eventually I will find the right man, then I still have that optimism or confidence about the future. And if I have that in place in my psyche, then envy is not the emotion that I'm going to feel. All right. Let me turn then to the sixth thing that's necessary. Suppose, I'll put it in the first person here. Suppose it's the middle of the winter and I've resolved to lose a few kilos. It's after Christmas and I've been eating too much of my mom's good cooking or whatever. And I've resolved to lose a few kilos by the spring so that I'm going to look good in my swimsuit again. So spring comes around and I'm looking at advertisements, and the advertisement shows this very fit looking man in a swimsuit, and he's looking awesome. And then I, glance over at the mirror and I see that I'm still, a few kilos overweight. So I'm disappointed with myself, and I feel bad that I haven't accomplished my weight loss goal, but I don't have to feel envious of that fit man in the ad, right? Because I can believe that my non-accomplishment, my failure to lose the weight, that's my responsibility. It's not that guy's fault that I didn't lose the weight that I set as a goal for myself. So taking responsibility, right, for your not yet having succeeded your goal, if that's your operative habit, you're not going to feel envious in response to other people who have succeeded about their goal. And then I think that sets up the seventh and eighth steps, where the redirection, where you hate the person or you want to sabotage the person or do some damage to that person who has succeeded. That's not going to happen if instead psychologically, and this is what a lot of people will do, they say, okay, I have failed. I'm going to learn from my disappointment. I'm going to own my failure or my lack of success here, and I'm going to use it to focus on improving myself. I'm going to take that negative energy and direct it in a positive sense. I'm the one who needs to work harder. I'm not going to go out and do something damaging. So putting all of those things together, envy requires that you have an important value, that you compare yourself to someone in a peer group, that you have, in fact, not accomplished that value or have outright failed to accomplish that value, that you have some self-doubt about your ability to succeed at that value, or you actually kind of believe or know for sure that you won't succeed at it. But part of you doesn't want to accept that failure is your responsibility. And so as a result, you redirect that pain or that self-disappointment to the other party. And then if it comes out in a physical form of destructiveness, then we have envy in the fullest sense. Now that's envy. And what I want to turn to in the next episode is the social and political implications of it. So far, we've talked about envy in a philosophical and moral psychological context. And clearly we know that different kinds of societies, right, whether they are tribal or feudal or socialistic or free market capitalist, make different emotional demands on people, or require for certain emotional strengths, right, and set people up for more likelihood of experiencing this or that other kind of emotion. So what I want to turn to is particularly the question of a free society, right? A liberal, democratic, republican, open society, however we want to characterize it, and the nature of envy's challenge for that kind of a society. So envy is a moral emotion. I think it's a negative emotion. It is a learned or acquired, right, psychological state that one can have various kinds of habits that one has built up that can predispose one to being envious, but at the same time, since it's not automatic, one can build up psychological habits that predispose one for admiration or respect or emulation and motivation in response to other people's successes. And so what then is going to be the philosophical and moral psychological implications of support for a free, liberal, democratic, republican kind of society, given that moral psychology?
The host of the Open College podcast, Dr. Stephen Hicks, is a renowned philosopher and author. His field of study and insights into postmodernism explain how it has become one of the most powerful intellectual movements of our time, and what that actually means. If you'd like to access more information from Dr. Hicks himself, then check out his website at www.stephenhicks.org. You'll be able to find details on his latest publications, courses, and philosophical information concerning business ethics, education, intellectual history, and religion. To stay up to date with the latest from Stephen Hicks himself, make sure you've subscribed to the Open College Podcast feed and follow at Open College Podcast on all your favourite social networks. And while you're online, please leave the show a review on iTunes and Stitcher.